Welcome to CEMP Talks, folks. My name is Christopher Unwell. I'm the head of CEMP, and we are very, very happy today to have Catherine Grant talking to us. Well, not so much talking to us about, but demonstrating to us, I suppose one would say, the academic video essay, of which she is a very skilled proponent. So, I'm going to hand over without too much ado, Catherine, so that we get a bit of time for questions, because I know people will want them. So off you go. Let's see if we can pull this off as smoothly as we did just now.
Yes, it's far too smooth. Let's see. So you should be able to see that, and then we're going to go into presenter view, but hopefully you can't see presenter view.
That's fine. Can we just check that? What we want.
Excellent.
That's good, okay. Good.
That's good. Okay, well, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, and also on YouTube later. I'd like to first of all thank Krista and also Austin Fisher for the invitation to present today. What I'm going to talk about and also show you is a work in progress, but a weird one, because the standalone media practice aspect of it, hence being very honoured to talk at CEMP's, in the CEMP series today, was actually made several years ago. So what I'm kind of doing today is revisiting that work, partly through necessity, because it's time to think about publishing the work. For various reasons, it can be published now. And so I'm just about to begin finalising a written contextualisation of the practice. And so that's required me to revisit it. And so it's been brilliant timing to have this talk, so I can kind of think out loud and start working out what works and what doesn't work. And I'm sure that our discussion today will be really helpful to me. So if you're able to stay around for that, I'd really appreciate it. And I'm definitely going to try and stick to around 40 minutes, and that will include about 10 minutes of video that I'm going to show in 2 parts. Yes, so basically what I'm going to be doing is activating this earlier standalone video work as screen studies research in an even more kind of formal sense. So you can see the title, obviously, and the 2 figures here. So we have Diana Dors and Barbara Windsor, and I put up their dates only because I want to state from the start that I'm kind of implicated in this research, and I imagine some of you will. But I know that when I've shown it in the various places I've shown it in the last few years, so many people in the audience have not known who these women are. They're born well after, the height of these actresses' career. They're more likely to know Barbara Windsor because of her role in EastEnders, but they certainly don't tend to know too much about the screen career, the film career of either actress. And that was my focus. That's been quite an interesting experience. So I'm going to just start by kind of looking at my abstract. I'm not going to read the epigraphs, I'm going to come back to those, but just to give you some sense of the context today. So cultural historian Lynda Nead's latest book, British Blonde, Women, Desire and the Image in Post-War Britain, which has just been published, was initially presented as the Paul Mellon Lecture series given at the Victoria and Albert Museum in the autumn of 2023. As part of that series, the Paul Mellon Centre commissioned 4 new short video essays from me and John Wyver. John being somebody who has a very different kind of filmmaking trajectory from me, in that he is a filmmaker, a broadcast film historian. He's made numerous amazing documentaries and also lots of other kinds of programs over the years. I'm somebody who learned how to do this back in 2009 by teaching myself. So we have really quite different trajectories as filmmakers or video makers. But we were both asked to respond to Lynn's materials. At that stage, the book hadn't been finalised. There were draft chapters, we saw her lectures and so on. And so we were asked to kind of respond to them, not perform them or remake them or adapt them, but kind of be ourselves in conversation with them. And our topics were women and desire, and a visual imagery of Diana Dors, Barbara Windsor, Ruth, Ellis and Pauline Boty, who were Lynn's 4 case studies as she focused in on this subject of the post-war blonde in Britain, and kind of looking at that in the sort of the aftermath of Marilyn Monroe, although that's the idea of the aftermath of Marilyn Monroe is complicated by Diana Dors, who sort of pre-exists Marilyn Monroe a little bit. But anyway, blondeness being this form of being that gets imported to Britain to a certain extent from the US and from Hollywood, and just looking at how those kind of ideas and practices around blondness that involve products as well as images, as well as desire. That was very much Lynn's topic in her magnificent book. And we've been very lucky. Our videos have been shown both at those original events back in the autumn of 2023, but also in lots of museum and university events in the UK and the USA over the last 3 years. As I now prepare my part of this work on blondness and the early film performances of Dors and Windsor, who were the two case studies I was asked to interact with for scholarly publication, I will look back at the production of my 2 videos as compilation-based practice research, like the earlier videographic studies of film performance, like my earlier videographic studies of film performance and stardom. These were both informed by an online vernacular of movie star tributes, as well as by the experimental editing procedures of artist-precursors. So today I'm going to focus on the related but differing display forms arrived at in each video through the processes of material thinking. One curatorial and celebratory, the other modulatory and deconstructive, bespeaking difficult feelings about the increasingly perturbing mise-en-scène of its stars' performances. I'll reflect on this work of ambivalent videographic criticism and explore the role it can play in practice-based methodologies of cultural history. And a footnote here just sort of flags up a couple of the key pieces of work that I've done. I really have done quite a lot on star studies in videographic form over the last 15 years or so. A lot of that work was written up, or a lot of my reflections on that work was written up in a piece for Cinema Journal before it changed to Journal of Cinema and Media Studies back in 2017. Where I'm looking at experimental videographic approaches to film performance. And I've also made quite a few studies of film stars in videographic form. And I've also collaborated with Laura Mulvey in reflecting on her work on star studies in videographic form as well, most notably on her video remixing Marilyn Monroe's performance alongside her co-star in A Gentleman Prefer Blondes in the Two Little Girls from Little Rock sequence. Okay, so those are available. I will probably refer to some of them. So I refer in my abstract to artist-precursors, and I just thought I'd mention a few of them. These are people who are really quite well known for working on stardom and celebrity, and at times on film stars. So obviously Andy Warhol and the aesthetics of all of the Marilyn diptychs and all of his multiple other studies of Marilyn Monroe. I've had the pleasure of visiting many of those over the last years, and obviously was interacting with those in relation to Laura Mulvey's work as well, because that's a key reference point for her. But also, and partly through my collaboration with Lynda Nead, Lynn Nead, on her book on the British blonde, the figure of the fourth of her British blondes, Pauline Boty, who was a strawberry blonde, unlike the platinum blondes of the rest of her case studies, but who nonetheless made blondness a subject in her work. And I didn't want to have any images that were too big going onto YouTube, so I've just given you a Google view here of one of her most famous studies of Marilyn Monroe and the only blonde in the world. And you can see that both of these artists are using kind of repetition, sectioning off, blocking off part of the image in order to kind of formulate their art, which has been pretty influential on me. Other kind of artists I haven't pictured here for me in stardom would be Joseph Cornell and Mark Rappaport, and both of those, like my third choice of artist, have worked with film as well as the still image, as well as painting and so on, and collage. And my other example of someone whose work has inspired me in recent years is Joe Gregory, the British the Black British artist who works in multimedia forms, and particularly thinking about this work, her work on celebrity again, in her series of studies, Celebrity Blonde. Again, didn't want to include too big a picture, but you can see there the little thumbnail image of her work, Princess Diana, which consists of some found photographs, mounted onto a kind of background of her own cyanotopes with a lock of golden blonde hair. And this kind of lock of hair is sort of something that she reuses in this work. I'm also, obviously, as well as being influenced by artist precursors, I've also been influenced by people who've written about those artist precursors. So it's a lot of feminist scholarship on this work. And I think most notably Erica Balsam's work in her book that I'm quoting here, Exhibiting Cinema and Contemporary Art, but also Mary Desjardins' amazing books on film stardom and films about stardom. I'm kind of interested here in the way that Balsam is writing about Candice Bright's work, and the way she actually names part of the function of this US artist's work as star studies. So not only does her work depict stars or mimic stars, because she uses embodied performance as part of her work, but Balsam is calling it star studies. She's also flagging up, which is pretty important context for me today, that the ambivalence of this work. I'll read a little bit of what she's written here. Something sinister emerges from within these entertaining montages. For the spectator, the fun of enjoying the star's performance, playing a kind of name that clip game, but also balanced by the realization that such performances play a key role in the formation of the gender and parental norms that frequently pass unquestioned. And if we kind of move down that quote, about a third of the way down, she writes, the ambivalence of this work is not to be mistaken for indifference, but rather is marked by contradiction and the antagonism of irreconcilable and often asymmetrical forces. The ubiquitous availability of the star's image offers itself up for recontextualizations that haggle with the text of celebrity while embracing it. So you can see this is a kind of troubled terrain. These may well be star studies, but they're very implicated star studies, implicated in this very ambivalent material. Now, my own non-artist scholarly context of commissioned practice research, in this case by an independent research institute, made me prioritize in my own work scholarly aims. Now, whether or not these works function as star studies, I don't think they were in any obvious way underpinned by scholarly aims. Star studies for me is something with an academic tradition, academic bibliography, and a precursor body of published work, some of which is in practice. So I'm just working here to distinguish my own project from this, framing it using in particular the importance of a curatorial aspect, which, like lots of curatorial work, depends on a sense of the whole of the work, depends on a sense of completism of the collection. And I'm going to come back to this, but I just wanted to say that I'm aware that ambivalence is something that's been written about in this context before. So just to turn quickly, before I play the first video, to talking about Lynn's work, and how, in a way, she set me off on this track of following the path that I did, even before the book became a book. As the book is now a book, it's 230 pages of academic chapters, footnotes, bibliography, index, and also 147 mostly colour images. So it's an incredibly complete piece of work, because it's discussing two film workers and another person in the figure of, well, actually both of the remaining figures also appeared in screen media texts as well. Lynn is obviously very interested in film. A lot of what she's writing about in the book is film, but it is very interesting that she wanted to commission further work to supplement her own, to provide another focus in the live lectures. But I'm kind of interested in why she wanted specifically to curate film work. And I think we can see why in this quotation on page 132. Is it possible to reconstitute the labour and effort of, for example, Windsor's Carry On Blonde performance? Can we rediscover the signs of work or dismay that slip out of visibility when the film is viewed in normal circumstances? Film theorist Laura Mulvey has developed an experimental form of audiovisual criticism that she calls delayed cinema, in which she slows down, freezes, and repeats a short sequence of Hollywood film, as she did in her video about Marilyn, and in so doing reveals or releases a set of aesthetic qualities and affects that are an intrinsic part of the film, but that might otherwise be elusive or overlooked by conventional viewing and analysis. What is revealed through this method are moments of emotion, and something else, I think she writes there. I want to kind of carry on with what she is writing here. delaying, well, I'm not going to put it on screen, delaying the bikini scene in Carry On Camping, stopping the film at a particular frame. I'm just going to swap to another. Yeah, delaying the bikini sequence in Carry On Camping, stopping the film at a particular frame or slowing down the entire scene reveals aspects of the work that are otherwise invisible. The frantic clowning of Carry On performances interrupted, capturing the expressions and gestures between the exaggerated face pulling and unruly displays, and enabling a more critical and reflective viewing. A single frozen film frame can become intensely meaningful and uncanny in its unmooring from any original narrative context. Stilling Windsor's comic performance of the exercise drill in Carry On Camping, I'm going to come back to that later, reveals the effort, the bloody hard work, the misery of a cold, damp day in a field near Pinewood Studios. Neither cute nor zany, Windsor's face is drawn into a dreadful grimace, which once seen haunts the film and its fantasy of sexy schoolgirls and lecherous old men. The visual conclusion of the scene, when she tries to hide her breasts, discloses the tension and discomfort of being the butt of the Carry On joke and the shame of finding herself the object of its obscenity. So I think it's pretty clear that Lynn can see that in film, capturing a performance in motion reveals things to us that cannot be revealed, even in the most amazing ekphrastic critical writing. And she's particularly interested in what happens when we watch it in a way that we don't watch it in normal time, by slowing it and stilling it. So I was certainly very happy to take up her commission, but immediately I was more drawn with this work, as we'll see, to explore the visual performances of both of these actresses, Dors and Windsor, in motion, rather than in being kind of focused on stilling. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this particular choice a little bit later. So we're now coming to the beginning of talking about my own choices with the two videos. So I am also usually drawn to and sometimes criticised for cinephile approaches to my practice. That is to say, being drawn by things that catch my eye or ear in the frame of an obsessive love for cinema, and collecting those features in a remix or a montage. So with this subject, which, as we can see in numerous references even to this point in my presentation, of difficulty and ambivalence, I'm kind of finding myself in slightly uncomfortable territory. This is not my usual subject matter, and it didn't feel like that when I began the work. I was thinking, how am I going to connect to this? I had very ambivalent feelings from the beginning about both of these actresses. I very much grew up with both of them, particularly with Diana Dors, remembering her very much in the 70s and 80s as a celebrity, really, rather than an actress, somebody who appeared on television chat shows, extremely entertaining, extremely funny, by her own admission, sort of struggling with her weight and with men, and Barbara Windsor had much in common with that kind of difficult public persona. It was really only through appearing in EastEnders that she managed to escape some of the kind of darker publicity that she'd had through her marital choices and so on, and association with the Krays and things like that. So not let alone her work in the Carry On films, which were a huge part of my my childhood. So I'm kind of very much in this terrain of Susan Sontag on camp, but also this whole area of ambivalent criticism, which I will come back to a bit later. I got the Susan Sontag quote, although I'd read Notes on Camp many years ago. It was Lynn's focus on that quotation that made me take it up as well. And in her book, Lynda Nead writes of that quotation as follows. In her 1964 essay Notes on Camp, Susan Sontag refers to the sensibility of an era as something that is almost but not entirely ineffable. It is fugitive, a tonality that informs the period's ideas and behaviour. To understand a sensibility such as camp, to write its history, she suggests, requires a deep sympathy modified by revulsion. And in a very important comment, she writes, I am both drawn to and revolted by Carry On films. I am aghast at their punning and innuendo and appalled by their sexism and racism. I'm also convinced that to understand them is to access a period sensibility, and that is often overlooked in the preferred narrative of sexual liberation and modernization that's often associated with the figure of the blonde. So I obviously share Lynda Nead's revolted feelings here, but I also kind of co-constituted by a lot of what's going on. I watched these films. I don't know if I always enjoyed these films. I certainly had a difficult relationship with them, but I watched them in a family context where they were enjoyed fairly unproblematically, and where they were kind of celebrated, and where they were kind of normative in some sense, which is rather horrific nowadays, obviously. So onto the videos. I'm going to play this one. It's pretty self-contained and pretty obvious. You'll understand the title when you get to the last film in the compilation, but it's clearly a study of Diana Dors' screen styles between those years. It is the first decade of her acting career. This is obviously a compilation film, but it's the kind of compilation film that appears online. It's sort of a supercut. It's what Alison Dufresne might call a critical supercut, and one that is kind of underpinned in its selection process by scholarly aims in the first instance. I'll come back to the second and third instance in a second. But I mentioned the word completism. That was certainly on my mind. I had definitely felt feelings about the later part of Dors' work, as I'll come back to, but I really hadn't seen the beginning of her work. Now, Lynn mostly talks about the final film that you see in that compilation, Yield to the Night, which is a film by which time really Dors had become extremely famous. And it sort of was the launching pad for her US career, her short-lived Hollywood career. But I was really unfamiliar with these films. So my first job when I got the commission was really just to look at the vast ranges of Dors' work from 1947 to 1984 when she died, and just look at what I didn't know. And this was the area I didn't know. There's 29 films here. I think I managed to kind of get about 20 of them. Not all of them are available. And out of the 20, I feature 14, which is really my aim to be kind of pretty representative as a whole. But it was also kind of, I think, inspired by this feeling that I again shared with Lynn about Dors as a contradictory figure, especially in her later work being all body, a cartoonish parody, stimulating and vulgar, both a national icon and a transgression of British values. When you look at her early work, there's something that is kind of uncontaminated by this later parodic aspect, I think. She is very knowing. There's a lot of kind of self-referential performance nods to the audience, but it's not to the obvious degree that it is later in her work. So I guess my first kind of response to this was, I really wanted to bring this work to light. There was a kind of curatorial desire. I wanted to collect it. I wanted to redisplay it in a way that could make some kind of argument about how, at least in the earlier part of Dors' career, she was different. And her blondeness was something that we could see as a process of becoming. And that was very much what I'm trying to do in this chronological order compilation. So this idea of curation in video essays is something that I really didn't start with at all. I was much more driven by, in a way, conceptualizations of montage, of compilation, of a kind of audiovisual compilation. But really, I could see that a large part of my own scholarly practice, the scholarly aspects of it, were curatorial rather than argumentative or even expressive. They were kind of based on collecting and redisplaying something in order. And I've written about this in a lot more detail in this piece that was published in Feminist Media Histories a few years ago, which I was very much thinking about while I was making the work for the British Blondes project. And you can see here the video I'm writing about there. It's kind of fixed in this 6-screen format throughout. So it's like a choice of hanging something on a wall and letting it unfold in front of an audience with chosen timings, almost like a kind of parkour design of walking around an exhibition. This is very much on my mind, and it's been really brilliantly written about by, to start with in that issue, the the issue editor and the editor of Feminist Media Histories, Jennifer Bean, and I'm not going to read all of this through, but you know, she's sort of talking about what, from her understanding, is curatorial about this. And in the middle there, she's saying, when she tells us, Grant, that this display pattern is composed primarily according to a curatorial rather than expressive or argumentative logic, she takes seriously the meaning of care etymologically embedded in the English word curatorial. Theorized as an effective connective tissue between an inner sense and an outer world, care constitutes a feeling with rather than a feeling for others. And I think that, you know, that's true of both the work that Bean is writing about, but also the work on Diana Dors. So if I think about the kind of differing display forms that I've arrived at in this video in the first instance, it is, for me, compilation-based practice research. Through finding this form, I make lots of discoveries. I am certainly reflecting on the vernacular to which it is indebted, this online vernacular. But of course, I'm sure you will also be, as many of the audiences did, thinking of other forms of tributary culture, like the in memoriam sections of the Oscars or the BAFTAs. There's something that's, you know, quite poignant about my arrangement of this material and the dates kind of going by. It's very cheesy, but it's also, you know, kind of quite simple in the way that those tribute sections are. So this work is, I think, pretty straightforwardly curatorial and celebratory. It's very much happening in a kind of positive frame. I made my choices of sequences to use really like responding as a cinephile to these kind of moments of luminescence, even before Dors becomes fully blonde or platinum blonde. There's some way in which she is lighting up the screen. I'm focusing, as I just mentioned, on her becoming blonde. I'm using her star entrances. The very first scene in the video is her very first scene in cinema, where she turns around to meet the camera. I'm also focusing on this emerging star persona. So all of those are my kind of curatorial considerations. But I think from the tone and the other features of the video, perhaps most notably the music, there's a reparative function going on here. There is my kind of later view of Dors, so clouded and difficult, is in a way repaired by my choice, my kind of, I suppose, revealing of this earlier part of her career. So I want to just move on quickly to the Barbara Windsor video, which has ambivalence in its title, so perhaps is a slightly different kettle of fish. By Joan Littlewood, 1963, Sparrows Can't Sing. I always wanted to incorporate that film into this, but I just couldn't find a frame that was big enough for it, that wouldn't have, it would have required a different kind of framing context, possibly of my voice, more verbal discourse to explain why I was making these choices, whereas this obviously makes the same kind of sense as a compilation video in one way that the Diana Dors video does. I also felt that to avoid the carry-on films would have been to perform a dishonest swerve, because it would have been more evasive than my choice to focus on a part of the career that most people don't know so much about with Diana Dors' career. So in a way, I was kind of doomed to ambivalence with this one. But I was also very much working on the lead of Lynda Nead, with her very original argument about Freudian joke structure and the structure of the obscene joke in relation to all of the carry-on films, but specifically in relation to Barbara Windsor's performances. She's saying the structure here of the obscene joke is for Freud a gendered one. In his account, the joke teller is a man and the person at whom it is directed is a woman. Ideally, there is also a third party, another man, a listener who is witness to the obscenity and becomes the first man's accomplice. It is his laughter that confirms the pleasurable effect. It's kind of, in a way, not immediately applicable to every single scene that I've just showed you, but this general scene about who is the teller of the joke, the filmmaker, who is the person to whom it is directed, and who is the viewer, is obviously how the carry-on films kind of work and how they organize their dramaturgic structures. And there's a sense in which, and it's only kind of performed by my video, that Windsor is trapped by this repetition, this repeated structure, the performance of a mise-en-scène. Even if it is in motion, here it is absolutely fairly fixed. The aesthetics just came about because I couldn't include I couldn't include full screen images. I had to cut into it. I'm doing that obviously through this feminist tradition that I've already alluded to, and the tradition of artists working with the images of stars, but also from my earlier work where I've been playing with gender by dividing up the screen and playing with scale. So those kinds of games of scale and division are ones that I had been working with before. But I think in this case, it's really because I'm trying to handle this fairly toxic material with care. So, you know, that's a very kind of, I just couldn't in a way edit these videos in any other way. We can see though that I'm also very much working but at the suggestion of the films themselves, because they are also interested in the subdivisions of the frame and the playing with scale. Barbara Windsor is tiny compared to most of the actresses and actors that she appears against. So this joke is always about her size as well. So kind of making her bigger, making her smaller was something that the films themselves do with women generally, but also with Barbara Windsor. And we can see how, in a way, this whole schema was suggested by the anatomy scene, the X-ray scene. But it was also suggested by the way that mirrors are used to avoid patterns of reverse shot cutting. It sort of enables the structure of voyeurism in the Carry On films, and cutting into that felt like kind of exploding it a little bit. So here, you know, this is definitely compilation-based practice research again, but it deliberately swerves away from an online vernacular of movie star tributes. There are dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of carry-on compilations of the scenes that I have just cut up. So mine is certainly curatorial, but it's not like those scenes celebratory. It instead prefers to be modulatory and deconstructive. It's working to, like those compilations online, select Barbara's classic carry-on scenes, her boob jokes, if you like, but there's also a reparative function, I think. Nonetheless, I find it really difficult, even now watching my video, and I'm wondering if you had the same response. It gets harder and harder to watch, and it gets harder and harder to watch because it gets harder and harder for me to apply my schema. I can cut into the scene less and less. By the end, it's almost kind of unmediated by my scheme. So you're kind of really forced to watch these images in all their horror. And finally, I employ slowing down and a freeze frame on Barbara in order to avoid an inevitable return to a shot of Sid James as the lecherous Henry VIII. But I just wanted to finish by talking a little bit about the audio of the films. Obviously, I use the performers' own voices. There are many interviews with them online where they say these same anecdotes. The one I liked to use for both of the videos was their appearance on Desert Island Discs. In particular, I think the kind of Diana Dors one is a classic with Roy Plumley, and there's a kind of cut in my video to a character in a film exhaling a cigar who looks a lot like Roy Plumley, and you're kind of, that cigar exhalation matches him sort of breathing out on the tape. So there's all sorts of reasons why I kind of alighted on those words, so that the actresses do their own framing. But obviously the other very, very present feature of these videos is found music. I use found music a lot in my work. I'm usually using copyright-free or Creative Commons licensed music from the Free Music Archive, as I was in this case. And I often just look for music on the grounds of instrumental aspects, but also duration. So sometimes I have quite a random access to items on the Free Music Archive, and it's funny what draws my attention after that. And these two pieces came up because I was looking for pieces that were about just 3 minutes 45 seconds. The one at the bottom, Drops of Melting Snow, is the one in the Diana Dors video, and then The New Mown Hay is the one in the video you just watched. They're both from the same album, Music from a Hampshire Farm, and I know I was completely drawn to this Hampshire reference, but also the whole kind of remaking aspect of it. This is sort of inspired by classical music, which was inspired by folk music. And in a way, it's this sort of musical choice that reveals just how entangled I am in this subject, to use a kind of term that lots of feminists and other theorists are using, but Karen Barad would be one of them. which is talking about that we are not separate from these materials. I felt that very much as a video essayist rather than a scholar who preferred writing. With writing, it always did at least feel like I was outside, even if I wasn't. With video, I really never feel like I'm outside of what I'm remixing. I always need a further stage, the one I'm at right now, where I reflect on it. But I am totally implicated in this music, and for me, in this video and in these subjects, because of something to do with my maternal line. My mother was from Hampshire. She was from a family of barmaids and landladies, as well as agricultural labourers. And for her, both the figure of Diana Dors as a figure of escape and Barbara Windsor as a figure of the job that she used to do, and something about her physicality as well, are completely implicated in this for me. Now, I am a very different physicality. I've always had a very different form of escape than either of my parents. And so there's a sense in which these figures that I'm portraying in this video are part of that story of separation from family, of moving away. And that's a bit that I'll need to do a little bit more of in the written version of this. But certainly I will be framing it in this context of, once again, ambivalence, not to be mistaken for indifference or some sort of simple notion of love and hate, but really a kind of an underpinning relation of contradiction and antagonism, of irreconcilable and often asymmetrical forces. I'm not sure if I could ever really arrive at that positionality of reflection if I had simply been writing about this work. But arriving at the process of concluding this work, it's this position of ambivalence that I am totally underpinned by. And I think I can stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you for that. Yes, so much. And I don't know if people want to sort of chuck any questions or comments at you, just recovering from Barbara Windsor, but you might want to anything you want to ask, Catherine?
And really about anything that strikes you, please.
Cloudy.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was wonderful. I actually have like a million questions, but the one I am interested in more generally, but specifically after the two pieces that you've shown us, they sit quite differently in relation to, I guess, their own self-reflexivity. Maybe the second one wears that more visibly than the first. And I'm wondering how conscious of a choice that is for you when you are making it. Is that something you decide up front? Does it emerge through the work? I'm actually really surprised, and I love that you refer in the case of the first one to Jay Leda's book, Films Beget Films, and I never thought of your work as compilation films. So I really like that you describe it like that yourself. So I was wondering if you could say more about those choices.
Thank you, Cloudy. Yeah, I mean, I think the simple truth about all of my videographic work is everything emerges through the making of the work. Like I literally knew that I needed to make a collection, and beyond that, you know, that was it really in terms of planning. And it's for me the kind of process of what I discuss in numerous written pieces about my work as material thinking, following Barbara Bolt's work, you know, which is working at this kind of intersection or conjunction of the technology, that is the ripping, capturing, converting, importing, editing, exporting, uploading kind of spectrum, and the material, which in my case is usually digitized forms of films or TV shows, and then the kind of craft of editing, insofar as I, as a self-taught person, practice any kind of craft, but really myself as a scholar, you know, that's part of this material thinking. I have some craft knowledges and skills, but basically I also have many more decades as a film scholar working with these questions in different ways. So the material thinking that kind of emerges at the intersection of all of those elements, all interrelated again, to sort of nod to Barad one more time, you know, that's the space in which this work emerges. And so these ambivalent feelings are not there in a very clear sense at the beginning. I mean, I had them for both of these figures anyway. And it felt like when I chose, I couldn't kind of, the major constraint, I don't know if I mentioned it right at the beginning, but the major constraint in terms of the commission was 5 minutes. So each of the videos had to be under 5 minutes. Now, one of them slightly over, one of them is well under, so together they make 10 minutes. So in 5 minutes, what can you do? What can you meaningfully do in the context of studying stars and their visual performance, their visual appearances and performances? So for me, the kind of collection of moments was an obvious choice that I didn't even really think about. And also one I'd just done so many times. So I do think of my work as compilation. I mean, from really the second video onwards. So the first video I made was about one film. The second video was about comparing Code Unknown and Peeping Tom, and just wanting to show the multiplicity of different ways in which those films are related. So collecting all of the sequences that I needed to sequentially juxtapose was an act of compilation. Other films that I made, other videos that I made are much more obviously compilations. So a video like Dissolves of Passion, which was a collection of all of the dissolves in Brief Encounter and finding a form in which I could play them through in order for them to be meaningful, was a form of compilation. So yes, I think I've come to write about my work as compilation, claim it as that much more consciously in more recent years, but it's sort of always been a technique, because I think from the very beginning of my work, I didn't ever want to make voiceover driven argumentative pieces where, as a kind of scholar god, I was telling you this, this and this thing that you should think about. I'm much more drawn to the films made by artists that find other ways of, in a way, making a contribution to our understanding of stars, or to the internet cultures of the supercut. I've kind of always been sort of drawn to those forms. But thank you. Yeah. So it emerges, I think, in terms of self-reflexivity.
Thanks.
Barnaby.
Thank you. I think Austin was before me. So
Sorry. Austin, see you sitting there. Go on.
Thank you. And thanks very much, Katie. That was really, really interesting. And I think the kind of the thing about the compilation you're saying, and the montage, I suppose you could call it, and what really struck me was in the Diana Dors one, how her screen presence was so tangible, and her engagement with the mise-en-scène, and how that's inherently an audiovisual process that you're foregrounding. Then, as you say, with the Windsor video about I suppose the sinister nature of the male gaze, and how it's foregrounded by the slow motion and by the music. And so, but you said just before the talk that you're in the process of writing exegeses for these now. So I'm wondering, how do you try to translate that very audiovisual affect that you've accomplished with both videos into verbal scholarly analysis? And what's your process? And it's interesting what you just said about how you want to avoid being the scholar god. So how do you avoid that in the exegesis?
That's a great question. Well, hopefully I achieve avoiding being the scholar god, but I'm not sure. Obviously, it is a different process. So first of all, this is work that will accompany the videos, ideally. So if the work, obviously, it's got to be peer reviewed and it'll be accepted or not. With this work, if you're submitting, I mean, speaking to, I know a number of practitioners here, with this work, I won't be putting the videos in to be changed. The videos are the videos that I made in 2023. So what can be changed in the peer review process in good faith is the written aspect. So what I will be doing is what I've done today, really, in a way. This is, like, for me, very much a good, like, if not first stage, then an essential stage in this process, is sort of working out what I need to say and hearing back from you about what I might need to clarify. That's all kind of part of a useful process. So one of the things I always end up concluding, but also often saying in these spaces of reflection, is that I used to find scholarly writing really, really hard. I was not prolific. It was like pulling teeth and various other bits of body parts, painful body parts, to get my PhD thesis, which was still the longest thing I've ever written. And everything else has been really, really tough. So I there's almost a sense in which I was bound to turn to this kind of form, not because I find it easier, but because I find it much less anxiety inducing. There's something about entering the scholarly kind of tradition with this work that is less overwhelming to me than it was ever trying to make a written contribution to an established area of debate. And I suppose that part of that is because I'm the person that's made the video. So in a way, writing about the video is a lot easier than writing anything else. I'm the only one who can tell the story of the production of this video. And you can say, oh, you need to clarify this, or you need to tell me why you did this. But in a way, challenging my story is something I don't have to be anxious about anymore, because my story is my story. And so the process-based form of writing is liberatory for me. I know it is for students as well. Whenever I teach this, like, it's such a great form to teach students who have issues with writing of various kinds, because again, they feel ownership of the making process in some way and are able to tell the story of it. Telling stories is easier than writing arguments, in my humble opinion. So those are the kinds of questions. So in a way, how do I avoid being scholar God? Well, because I suppose, rather like Claudia's question about the issue of self-reflexivity, I only have a sort of, I kept notes. I now know while I'm making, I need to keep notes about the process, that I can't just try and remember many years later, or several months later. So I've kind of got my notes to go on, but really a lot of the important conclusions that I might draw from work are really ones that can change and they can evolve. And so if I were to be writing this piece in a year's time, it would end up being a different piece than the piece I will write now, and I will be writing in the next few weeks. So that scholar God persona is very contingent in this process, and very necessarily humble, although humble bragging is horrible as well. But there's a great quote that I like. I made a video very early on called Touching the Film Object, which is just a slowed down sequence from Bergman's Persona plus some words from Laura Marks, and she's talking about haptic criticism. And for me, this is a form of haptic criticism. And she's got this idea that with haptic criticism, where the words don't touch the surface, or you're trying to aim for the moment where the words of criticism touch the surface, and then the process of a kind of critical performance can take off from there. And I think that's very much how I feel, that this is so contingent. It's contingent on your response as an audience, a critical audience, as to whether or not my montage, my words, allows you to see it, the words taking off, or the concepts taking off, because you're watching it, you're co-participants in this process. In a way, again, you can be with writing, people can hold your hand through a written argument, but you have much greater ownership, I think, of watching a film and seeing whether or not it follows or not. So.
Just a bit of time, Barbie. You've got about 30 seconds, but go
30
for it.
seconds. Okay, I'll be very brief. Katie, as always, thank you. I just wanted to circle back to your use of the word care. When I watch especially the Diana Dors one, it's profoundly moving, because what you actually do with your approach is just let her faces speak for themselves rather than impose anything. And there's something, I'd forgotten how beautiful she is in her early films, and I kept thinking about, she's still beautiful in the Prince Charming video with Adam Ant, but it's a very different beauty. But when 40s Diana Dors, just letting her face speak for itself. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
Well, look, thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for a very different kind of CEMP presentation. I think everybody's really enjoyed it. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and for your comments. This is the last CEMP talk of this year, but do remember, I'm always open to suggestions for whatever we set up next year. And there will be a Kemp showcase next month. Okay, thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.